To this now, earlier this week, the United States presidential hopefuls met for the first time in person during the traditional presidential debate. Polls have shown that Kamala Harris won the debate by a huge margin. Harris and Donald Trump will go head to head in a highly contested election on November the 5th. Let's discuss this further now with Professor John Stremlau, who's an honorary professor of international relations at Wits. Professor Stremlau, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Quite an interesting debate following what was the debate in June with Biden. Very interesting and different this time around. Lots to unpack, of course, off the bat, starting with immigration, the economy, from abortions to even pets being eaten.
Yes, it certainly was. And Musa, this is a refreshing change from Biden's performance back in June. So it was very, very constructive in advancing Kamala Harris's and Tim Walz's candidacies. And the polls, you were rightly saying, gave her the win, even though Trump denies it, but then Trump refuses to have another debate and says he won the debate, and all the polls show that he's won the debate. Well, he's a 78-year-old narcissist and racist, and he sometimes is showing his dementia, cognitive decline at 78, at least compared to what he was in 2016 when he debated Hillary Clinton and dominated the stage. But now, you know, that Harris dominated and tweaked him repeatedly, but dominated on the issues. And yet, I don't know whether he's going to pull out a miracle and win in the Electoral College, even though he'll lose, as he did against Hillary Clinton, by millions of votes. And you know, the American is just a backward system in that regard.
And just speaking of that too, Professor, you know, he does deny, of course, losing that debate and not doing so well, but he also says that he had to battle three opponents. They're also referring to the journalists, Lindsay and Dave, who also held that presidential debate. But when we talk about the plans here, Kamala Harris seemed to have clear bullet point plans, particularly when it came to the economy, when it came to tax breaks for childhood development, when it came to tax breaks, when it came to housing as well. And of course, for small businesses, there was a clear-cut plan. And she kept saying, I have a plan. I have a plan. What is your plan? And it didn't seem that Donald Trump gave a clear-cut plan for his vision.
She laughed when he said that I have a concept for a plan in healthcare reform. And, you know, he's never built the wall, and he's going to talk about immigration expulsions and all these other kinds of things. But in foreign policy, I just can't resist mentioning that the difference between Harris and Walz and Vance and Trump on Africa, on Middle East, on NATO and Europe is huge. I don't know what his position is on Latin America, and I only focus on Africa because it is so serious a threat to Africa in the U.S. neglect of the continent, which was characteristic of his first term. But I've read part of the Project 2025, which is called a transitional document for guiding the new administration. And it was a Trump administration, and it would cut all aid to South Africa, and that's $6 billion a year, over 100 billion rand, and that would be a tragedy. And yet Kamala Harris will continue to work business-like, would have differences of views on particular issues, sure, but these two democracies could work together as they did during the Biden-Harris administration.
Professor, when you also made mention of Kamala Harris basically chuckling at the response that he gave when it came to healthcare, Obamacare also took center stage there, and her rebuttal was that, well, you continued actually with some of our policies too, and that being Obamacare. He called it lousy, saying that he worked with it because that's what he was forced to work with. He couldn't get rid of it. But again, not putting in a clear-cut plan for healthcare.
Well, no, there's not a clear-cut plan, but in the general demeanor of the two candidates, you know, she is very much evocative of Obama's hope and change in bringing people together, and Trump is a divider and a polarizer, and spends all his time debunking those who are supporting Kamala Harris, and you know, on the crowds of rallies, he had 550 people show up for Tucson, Arizona a couple days ago, and she had 17,000 in Greensboro, South Carolina, and both of those are swing states. But the electoral management bodies of Arizona and of Georgia, where I still vote, are controlled by Republicans, and they're going to cause havoc in getting the count certified in the event that Trump is behind.
On foreign policy, too, you made mention of Project 2025, another denial. Donald Trump had said that he hasn't even read that document. And it is potentially quite harrowing for South Africa when we think about that cutting of aid, particularly to this country. But also when he spoke about the wars in Russia and between Russia and Ukraine and in the Middle East as well, he said, well, look, if I were the president of the United States, Russia would have never invaded Ukraine in the first place, and what's going on in the Middle East wouldn't be continuing right now.
Well, Kamala Harris had the comeback on Putin. He'd eat his lunch. I mean, dictators flatter Donald Trump's very narcissistic personality with flattery, and he thinks it's respect. But the Middle East is a good case in point. Bibi Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, desperately wants Trump in the White House. He made that plain when he came to Washington, and he is hanging on for that contingency, and he's committed to it. How Kamala Harris will operate on the Middle East, it's a tricky issue within the domestic political situation in the U.S. And you know, you try to balance the Israeli traditional alliance with the U.S. and its regional role with the plight of the Palestinians. But I think that she would favor the plight of the Palestinians first and foremost, and try to get a two-state solution. If the Israeli people could throw Bibi Netanyahu out of office, that might be possible.
I mean, she did also say that Israel does have the right to defend itself, and America will continue to supply arms to it, but then also buffered that by saying that the killing of innocent women and children and civilians in Palestine is completely unacceptable too. But what I want us to chat more about, Professor, is how the effects of these kinds of debates and polls. You know, we saw back then when Hillary Clinton in 2016 debated Donald Trump, she clearly won that debate, but didn't win at the elections.
No, she didn't, although she won by 3 million votes. And in South Africa, that would count as a victory because one person, one vote. But the founders of the American Republic created a federation, and they were most preoccupied with getting the states feeling comfortable with a promise of equality, and the Senate reflects that, so that you have a small state like you know, Nevada or one of the neighbors of California with 2 senators, and 40 million people in California with 2 senators, and a few 100,000 in the neighboring rural states. And so it's not fair, but it's like a regional economic community in Africa. You've got to figure out a way to reconcile sovereign states, and those colonies were sovereign, sort of they joined in the Revolutionary War, but then they wanted to protect their interests in I come from a small state, Connecticut, so I'm not, I've worked in New York and Washington and in big cities, Atlanta, but not insensitive to the need for a federal system.
Professor Stremlau, just before I let you go, what role does popular culture play? We've seen celebrity endorsements when it comes to presidential elections and campaigns too, particularly also for Kamala Harris. Following this debate, Taylor Swift, a worldwide popular artist as well, she endorsed Kamala Harris, and then, of course, then she went on to share the link for the vote.gov website, and they're saying that the traffic that they saw there was unprecedented, over 400,000 people visiting that site. What kind of a contribution does that have, an impact does that have when you have these kinds of celebrity endorsements, and do they actually matter?
Well, they can't hurt, and in the case of Kamala Harris, that is, Taylor Swift was a big catch, and I'm glad that she did it, and then in that South Carolina, or no, in the Pennsylvania rally that she had today, she had a Republican introduce her, and Liz Cheney and her father Dick Cheney, I never admired politically until they endorsed Kamala Harris, and I think she could bring people together, and the country culturally may be ready for that. She seems to have the wind at her back, and the wind is blowing against Donald Trump, but it's still a badly polarized society, and I pray to God that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz win.
Professor Stremlau, always a pleasure hearing your insights. Appreciate your time.